It is great to be back. I've actually been on a little bit of a spring break. I think it was Pat Buchanan who joked that Ted Kennedy was the only 59-year-old he knew that still went on spring break to Florida. Well, I'm not 59. And by the way, I took my family. That's why we went spring break for my kids. But we did a little backyard tour of Virginia, went to Stanton, Virginia, birthplace of Woodrow Wilson, went down to a resort called Primland, very close to North Carolina. And then swung back through Charlottesville, visited James Monroe's house, Highland, this time around, among other things. So very cool, lots of good restaurants and all of that. But I've been monitoring politics this week. It is great to be back. And I thought it might be fun to kind of do a weekend wrap up of the stuff that transpired in the last week or so. And I want to start with Charlie Kirk, who had a pretty interesting week. He had a controversy where he talked about 30-year-old women not being in their prime. Not sure I agree with that one. But anyway, that's not what Charlie Kirk said that I found the most interesting this week. It actually had to do with the Electoral College and the state of Nebraska. And if you're not familiar, let me just roll the tape.
Their electoral votes based on congressional district. And also, 2 of the votes go to who wins the entire state. Joe Biden got one of those electoral votes in 2020. Obama got one of them in 2008. We were playing around on 270win.com, and I didn't see any real Republican focus or effort to try to get this done. So we decided to make a point of it. You decided to make a point out of it. Now, this is far from over. The fight is on, everybody. But what happened yesterday was one of the great movements that we've seen in quite some time. The power of this audience, the power of all of you that picked up your phones.
All right, I do want to stop it there for a second. Charlie Kirk does have a lot of power. It is pretty amazing. As far as I know, he is the one who started this idea about trying to get Nebraska to change the way they count their electoral votes. As he said, most states, in fact, 48 states in the union are winner take all. If you win California, you get all of California's delegates. But there are 2 states, Maine and Nebraska, who apportion them differently. I think it was in the 1970s, Maine decided if you win the whole state, you get a 1 or 2 delegates, and then each congressional district also awards a delegate. And then I think about 20 years later, I think it was in the early 90s, maybe 1992, that Nebraska did the same thing. But for a long time, it really didn't matter because the congressional districts basically went the same way that the state went. But that changed in 2008, as Charlie Kirk was saying, as Omaha became more liberal, for example, they started actually giving their congressional vote to a Democrat, in this case, Barack Obama. And so Nebraska, most of Nebraska went Republican, but this one congressional district, and that's 1 delegate vote. And that could be the difference in a very close election. Every 4 years, we talk about the possibility of an electoral tie. So it could happen, and 1 electoral vote could be the difference. I think the first time Maine split their vote, I think, was with Trump. I could be wrong about that. But basically, this is a big deal if Nebraska were to actually change the way they allocate their electoral votes. It could be the difference between Trump or Biden winning in 2024. And the fact that Charlie Kirk was able to elevate this, I think, is a big deal. I don't want to give him too much credit, but I think it speaks to how powerful these kind of right-wing grassroots talking heads are. That he comes up with an idea, talks about it on his podcast, and a few hours later, the governor of Nebraska is endorsing the idea and they're taking it up. Anyway, let's go back to the clip.
That decided to let your voice be heard, in particular, those of you in Nebraska. We sent out a tweet yesterday saying that Nebraska needs to fix this. This is a way to guarantee Donald Trump gets another electoral vote. It guarantees another vote to make Donald Trump more likely to become the 47th president of the United States. It opens up Nevada. It opens up different pathways. And if you're trying to win the presidency, you want as many options as possible. Our working theory on this program is that the Rust Belt elected Donald Trump in 2016, and the Sun Belt very well might elect Donald Trump in 2024. It stops giving Democrats a free electoral vote in a red state in every election indefinitely. So we decided to make a point out of it. And the governor of Nebraska, to his great credit, Governor Pillen, came out and said, I support this bill and I will sign it. That came out of nowhere, but it came from you. It came from the grassroots. It came from the people. President Trump, a couple hours later, came out and said, I love this bill. Let's sign this. Let's get this done. Let's make this happen. And now all eyes and the eyes of the nation are on the unicameral Nebraska.
Okay, anyway, the Nebraska legislature apparently has decided not to do this, and it wasn't even close. So as far as I know, this is not going to happen. But you could see that this came out of nowhere. Apparently, it was an idea spawned by Charlie Kirk that the next thing you know is actually being voted on and taken up by the Nebraska legislature. I think that's pretty amazing. And it shows, again, the power of these talking heads, not just to influence public opinion, but to get, essentially he is an opinion leader who got elected officials to act very quickly. Now, I do think the ramifications of this are pretty crazy. So think of it. If Nebraska changed their rules, and let's make, no pretense about it, they would be changing the game or changing the rules in the middle of the game in order to help Trump. Then what Democrats would next try to do is get Maine, which also does a similar, Maine and Nebraska are the two states that are not winner take all. Democrats would try to get Maine to change, right? And then it would be equal again. But then where does this arms race end? Next thing you know, you could have states. Let's have California, could be 4 states. Let's get, 8 U.S. senators out of California, and then Texas will join in and try to get this arms race again. Where does it end? We saw there was pressure on Joe Biden from the left when Biden was first elected back in 2020. There was pressure on him to pack the U.S. Supreme Court. There's nothing that says there has to be 9 justices. You could have as many as you want. The same thing with the filibuster. We're going to talk about that in a second. But there are so many norms, and a lot of the things that are holding this country together really are norms or precedent. It's not the law. It's not written in stone that that each state has to be winner take all, or that we have to keep Nebraska or Maine the way they are. In fact, delegates weren't always apportioned winner take all in the past. I don't think so. But once you start trying to change the rules, I do fear that it is a slippery slope, and I don't know where it ends. But of course, it's not just Republicans who are thinking about this sort of thing. Democrats are too. Let's go to our next story about Sonia Sotomayor, the Supreme Court justice. She's 69 years old, and there is now pressure on her to retire so that Joe Biden could pick a younger justice or nominate another justice. Of course, it would have to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate. Let's go to a clip here.
The direction of the Supreme Court has had liberals worried for years. And tonight, some Democrats focusing that angst on Justice Sonia Sotomayor. The current 6-3 conservative majority led to the overturning of Roe versus Wade. A landmark Supreme Court decision that had protected abortion rights for decades. That decision has opened the door to concerns around a whole host of issues the court could weigh in on, from gun control to freedom of speech to consumer protections.
Rarely have there been a couple of years where so much constitutional law changed so quickly, all in a conservative direction.
The swing in the balance of high court power is directly related to the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who chose not to retire at the tail end of President Barack Obama's term, despite being in her 80s and suffering from cancer.
So that was an NBC News report. I understand why Democrats are worried about this. Again, Ruth Bader Ginsburg should have retired when Obama was president. She thought she could make it until Hillary Clinton was president. That obviously didn't happen. But it is a little bit apples and oranges. Sonia Sotomayor is 69. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was in her late 80s. I think she was like 18 years older. So that's a big, big, big difference. If you ask me, again, there's nothing wrong with Democrats thinking that it would be smart for Sotomayor to retire so that Biden could get the pick, could at least make the nomination. But it does show you how they're thinking very strategically. I wouldn't put it quite in the same category as trying to get Nebraska to change the way they apportion electoral votes. But, it is kind of gamesmanship outside the normal scope of, hey, let's work really hard and win this election. I think that that NBC report sort of framed it as like, this is a bad idea because it's an election year. And I'm also not sure that is true. Okay. So it is now, April. And so, you've got 6 or 7 months. If Sotomayor were to announce her retirement, Democrats narrowly control the U.S. Senate. Now, remember, though, Republicans cannot filibuster anymore. You cannot filibuster a judicial appointment. First, it was Harry Reid who said you could still filibuster the Supreme Court, but just not other judicial appointments. Then when Trump became president, Republicans then kind of upped the ante or escalated things and said, we're not going to allow you to filibuster even Supreme Court picks. So Republicans couldn't filibuster. Democrats have a very slim majority in the Senate. Democrats have a president. The one big asterisk is whether or not West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, he has said recently that he would not vote for judges unless at least one Republican also voted for that judge. And so that would potentially mean that Joe Biden would have to pick somebody that would win over some Republican, maybe at least one Republican, plus someone like Kristen Sinema, who is an independent as well. So I would say not impossible, but certainly a tall task. But it may still be worth the gamble. If Donald Trump wins the election, he's already dramatically changed the Supreme Court. And imagine if he got another pick or two, it would be pretty amazing. Okay, now I want to move over to something else, another wild card maybe that could impact the course of the race, and that is RFK Jr. I think it is entirely possible that in a head-to-head binary choice, Joe Biden wins the presidency against Trump, but that a third-party candidate like an RFK Jr. could mess things up, could take votes away from Biden, therefore thereby electing Donald Trump. Now, there are people who say, well, RFK Jr., though, is going to appeal to Trump voters. He might take just as many Trump voters as he does Biden voters. And I'm not sure about that. For one thing, one of the big super PACs supporting RFK Jr. is apparently funded by a big Trump donor, leading me to believe that the advertisements would be done in such a way that would seek to peel off Democrats and get them to vote for RFK Jr. Whether that happens or not, it's very clear that Sean Hannity of Fox News is trying really hard to help RFK Jr. Let me show this clip, and I will talk about how I think he's doing that on the other end.
The issue of Kennedy, well, he is what he is. He is a devout radical environmentalist who frequently was heaping praise on Bernie Sanders and his radical Green New Deal. In the past, he's called for a complete ban on fracking. He's applauded Obama's limits on oil exploration, tweeting, quote, hashtag keep it in the ground. No, I say bring it out of the ground. Anyways, campaign website, RFK Jr. promises to, quote, protect wildlands from further development by curbing mining and logging and oil drilling and suburban sprawl, as he calls it. This will undoubtedly drive up the cost of everything, especially housing. And that's not all. The Kennedy campaign also has a plan to dismantle the police. Quote, Kennedy will reorient police to serve, not occupy, black communities to keep neighborhoods safe rather than harassing their residents. There's also a section on Kennedy's website about student loan forgiveness. He plans to make, quote, student debt dischargeable in bankruptcy and cut interest rates on student loans to zero. Who wants to lend people money and not get interest? Anyway, naturally, small business loans will continue to accrue interest. Here's another proposal that, well, bleeding heart liberals will find very tempting. Kennedy wants to slash the U.S. military budget and use the money for socialized health care. RFK Jr.'s running mate, very wealthy attorney, compelling life story from Silicon Valley. Her name is Nicole Shanahan, a devout far-left Democrat. Notably, by the way, Shanahan has spoken out against in vitro fertilization. But thanks to Shanahan, well, the Kennedy campaign now has extremely deep pockets and will pose a serious challenge to Biden's reelection. If you are a left-wing voter, Kennedy, frankly, gives you all the nutty Biden, Bernie Sanders, Green New Deal, climate alarmist religious cult policies, maybe without the corruption and sleaze and the chaos. And he definitely knows what day of the week it is. Got to give him credit for that.
So Hannity obviously is not a journalist. He is an activist. He's carrying water for Trump. So what is he up to here? I mean, we all need content, so he wants something to talk about, but it seems like he has an agenda, and I think there are three things he's trying to do. And by the way, I don't think this is an isolated incident. I expect there will be many segments, and there already have been others, but many segments about RFK Jr. on Hannity and other shows. It's not just a one-off, okay? So first of all, what I think Hannity is up to is he is trying to tell Fox viewers, Fox's Republican viewers, don't vote for RFK Jr. because he is a leftist. Number one. Number two, I think he's trying to tell Fox News's Democratic viewers to vote for Kennedy. Now, you may think there aren't a lot of Fox News Democratic voters. I don't know what the status is currently, but Fox News used, at least a few years ago, their audience was so large that they actually had more Democratic viewers in terms of raw numbers than the other cable news networks, even though the other cable news networks catered toward progressives. Fox News actually had more Democrats watching than those other networks. But I think the most devious, sneaky, and interesting thing that Hannity is up to here is by attacking RFK Jr. as a leftist and a progressive, he is creating this permission structure for leftists and progressives. They see Hannity doesn't like him, he must be good. This is what I hate it, by the way, when Democrats do this. But sometimes you might have heard about this, where Democrats will try to intentionally, they'll play in a Republican primary. They'll try to help the most Trumpy MAGA candidate win. And the way they try to help the most Trumpy MAGA candidate win is by running ads attacking him for being close to Donald Trump. Now, what they know is that if you run an ad in a Republican primary attacking a candidate for being like Trump, it doesn't hurt them, it helps them. So it's an attack that is ironically, or not ironically, but is that deviously meant to help the person you're attacking. That, I think, is what Hannity is up to here. He is attacking RFK Jr., but doing it in a way that should help him. If Sean Hannity is attacking you, calling you a leftist, that should help you among progressive viewers. And so I think that's what he's up to here. And again, if it was just a one-off, I wouldn't worry too much about it. I think we're going to see 6 months of Fox News and Hannity playing this game. And over time, I think it very much could work. And again, RFK Jr. is not going to be the president. He's not going to get a big percentage of the vote. I think Ross Perot got 19% in 1992. It doesn't really matter. What matters is if RFK Jr. can get 5% of the vote in a state like Georgia or Arizona, one of these swing states that would deprive Joe Biden from winning it. Okay, interesting stuff there. And I think there's a theme so far, whether it's Charlie Kirk in Nebraska or Hannity, or even the Democrats trying to talk or pressure Sonia Sotomayor into retiring. A lot of devious stuff happening, and a lot of it's being pushed by people who are very powerful now, influencers, as they're called, media folks who are using their megaphone not to be kind of impartial journalists or even analysts, but to be activists. Whether they're trying to push Sonia Sotomayor to retire, push the state of Nebraska to change the way that they award electoral votes, or push RFK Jr. on progressives and on Democrats, I think there is a recurring theme at work. Okay, next I want to go to Marjorie Taylor Greene, who did an interview with Tucker Carlson. This one's a little bit, I think it's another long clip. I do apologize. Some of these clips are somewhat long, but I think it's worth commenting on, which I will do on the other side.
So, I mean, is it true, do you think, that the Republican speaker would bring this up at when your recess ends and get it passed without the majority of Republicans, but with Democrats? Like, could that actually happen?
Yeah.
This, of course, is talking about Speaker Mike Johnson and whether or not Republicans at the House is going to fund Ukraine.
Yeah, because that's what he's planning to do. Here's what I've been told. Well, first off, let's go back, Tucker. The last vote that we had on any Ukraine funding was on September 28th of 2023. That was only months ago. And that vote, only 101 Republicans voted yes for $300 million. $300 million to go to Ukraine. And that was because I pitched an enormous fit and said, take this money out of our Department of Defense. We should not be funding a foreign war in order to fund our military. That's completely wrong. And our military, their mission, as stated on their website, is to put our national security first. It's all about our national security. Fighting a proxy war with Russia in Ukraine, which is a non-NATO member nation, is not protecting America's national security interest. It doesn't protect the United States of America. As a matter of fact, that pushes us closer and closer to World War
just a quick
III.
editor's note here. I think Marjorie Taylor Greene has this one exactly wrong. Appeasement is provocative. If China, for example, sees the United States of America abandon Ukraine and allow Russia to invade Ukraine and get away with it, then I think that incentivizes China to be provocative and to invade Taiwan. Maybe that's how we get into World War III. So I think Marjorie Taylor Greene has it exactly wrong here.
This isn't a Republican speaker we have right now. This is a Democrat speaker of the House, because there is zero daylight between what Nancy Pelosi did last Congress and what Mike Johnson is doing now as our so-called Republican Speaker of the House.
Look, so this is why, was it a week or two ago, Marjorie Taylor Greene was mad at Speaker Johnson for passing a continuing resolution to avoid a partial government shutdown. And she filed this motion to vacate the chair. I think it was always about Ukraine. I don't think it's about spending. I don't think she cares about spending per se, budgets and deficit. I think she cares about supporting Russia and not helping Ukraine. And I think that's what Tucker Carlson cares about too, my former boss. And I guess that is the tie-in, which is that he's now got this show that is, I'm not showing you clips from, we had the one NBC clip earlier, but a lot of the things that we're watching, whether it's, there's the Fox News, but Charlie Kirk, and now this Tucker Carlson YouTube channel, And again, not really analysis, not opinion or conversation, but attempts to drive the debate. So it's activism. But again, Speaker Johnson, she's saying that he's a Democrat. It's pretty absurd, actually. But that's the state of things, and that's where we are, and we'll keep an eye on it. I do want to end on a more positive story, and that is John Fetterman, Senator John Fetterman, who was my person of the year last year. I felt like when 2023 started, I was not a big fan of John Fetterman, and I thought that he probably should retire. He was in bad health. It seemed like that his campaign and his wife and his team tried to kind of underplay the seriousness of his health condition. I was also just not a fan of him politically or ideologically. And he has just been amazing. The turnaround, it started around August or September of last year. And he started making these very gutsy, tough pronouncements on things that I agree with him on. And I think, there were several, but the most obvious was his support of Israel in the wake of the attack, the October 7 attack. And I think that he is, aside from being kind of a profile in courage in terms of his political stance, is standing up to his own party, the Democratic Party, and the left of his party, which I think is very noble. It might not surprise you to learn, as someone who has done this myself, to a certain degree, that I actually think it's admirable and harder to stand up to your own team than it is to stand up to the other side in this political environment of this day and age of polarization and tribalism. You are rewarded for telling your audience what they want to hear, and you are punished for telling your quote unquote team something other than what they want to hear. So I thought that John Fetterman was a profile in courage, but also, aside from that, the grit that he has demonstrated in his health battle, including not only the stroke that he seems to have made major progress in recovering from, but the depression, and being, I think, upfront and honest about battling with depression, I think is inspirational and courageous, and it's helping other people. And he was talking about it this week, and I want to share that with you.
1 year later, where are you? How are things going?
I am grateful, and I'm just so happy to be in a much different situation right now. I have the opportunity to sit with all of you today to talk about mental health and how incredibly important that is to do that. And I didn't think I was going to be in that same place when I was coming out there. When I decided to check myself in, I thought this could be the end of my career. And I maybe even lost my family. But to having all of that and to be able to have that conversation, whether or not it's a political winner, but it's an important conversation that I think we really have to have in this nation, and that's what I've been able to do, and I'm grateful for anyone to allow me to talk about it.
And we have to talk about news of day, of course, but I'm curious about what turned it around for you before we get into news.
And what advice do you have for those that might be hesitant to seek help?
There's no get help. It works. And if you're skeptical, I was too. I'm like, oh, this doesn't change. Like nothing's going to help. But it did, and it worked.
So there you have it. I mean, I just think kudos to him. It's great to have a story we can end on that's inspirational. And I think he's still doing good work by talking about what he has gone through. And if you're struggling out there, let it be an inspiration to you. You can get help. And maybe there's a bright ending, and certainly it has been with him. So kudos to John Fetterman. I'm happy that we can end on a good note. And I want to encourage you, if you've not done so already, if you're watching this on YouTube, please go to subscribe to the audio podcast. It's called Matt Lewis Can't Lose. And if you're listening, go to youtube.com/Matt Lewis and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Thank you for all you do, and we'll see you back here soon.